The human had never seen a world like this before. The moment he stepped down from the small transport ship, he stopped completely, overwhelmed by the sight before him. The sky stretched endlessly above, painted in shades of violet and gold, like a sunset that had been frozen in time. The air was cool and pure, carrying a strange, gentle vibration, as if the planet itself was alive, quietly breathing around him. In the distance, enormous crystalline towers rose into the sky, their surfaces reflecting the strange light and making the entire landscape appear as if it was glowing from within. He had traveled across galaxies to reach this place, thousands of light-years away from everything he knew, and with every step forward, his heart beat faster. Not just from fear, from wonder. He tightened the straps of his backpack and carefully studied his surroundings. The streets were wide and perfectly smooth, unlike any human city he had ever seen. Along the pathways grew strange plants that emitted a faint glow, their colors shifting in ways no human artist could have imagined. Alien beings moved around him. Some were tall and impossibly thin, with long, elegant limbs and movements that looked almost weightless. Others were smaller and rounder, moving through the streets with surprising speed and balance. Every one of them was different. Every one of them was fascinating. Their faces were unfamiliar, but their emotions were not. He could see curiosity, surprise, amusement, and caution in their expressions. Their eyes reflected the light like polished glass. Their voices carried unfamiliar melodies. Their gestures told stories he didn't yet understand. For a moment, he simply stood there, realizing how small one person could feel in a universe this vast. But he had not come here as a tourist. He had not crossed the galaxy just to observe. He had a mission, a purpose, and somewhere in this alien world, he would find the answer he had traveled so far to discover. Observe, learn, and report back. But he had not expected to enter the royal city so soon. The palace loomed ahead, a magnificent structure of crystal and silver, and he felt a mixture of awe and nervousness. The doors, wide enough to hold 10 humans side by side, opened as he approached, as if welcoming him or perhaps testing him. Inside, the air felt different, warmer, softer, as if it had been shaped for beings like the alien princess he had heard about. He walked carefully, not wanting to make a mistake. The court was filled with alien nobles, their clothing shimmering, with metallic threads and patterns that seemed to move as they did. He noticed a young figure standing at the center, a 17-year-old princess, regal and poised, with eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her posture was perfect, her every gesture deliberate, and she radiated a confidence that could make anyone uneasy. The human felt a twinge of nervousness. He had dealt with difficult people before, but this was different. She was not just proud, she was royal, and her pride was protected by tradition, expectation, and the eyes of those who waited for her to speak. It did not take long. The princess turned her gaze toward him, sharp and assessing. She tilted her head slightly and gave a small, dismissive laugh. The words she spoke were quick and cutting, their meaning clear, even without understanding the language completely. From her tone and the reactions of those around her, the human understood that she was mocking him. His appearance, his strange human ways, even his calm approach to the alien environment, all of it was fuel for her amusement. A ripple of laughter followed her words, polite at first, but growing louder as the quarters joined in. The human felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, the instinct to defend himself almost overwhelming. He wanted to explain to prove that humans were more than what she assumed, but he caught himself, paused, and instead did something unusual. He said nothing. His lips remained closed, his expression calm, and he simply observed. He watched the princess closely. There was more to her than her pride and sharp tongue. He noticed the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers twitched as if holding back something. He saw the way her eyes darted around the room, making sure everyone was watching her, ensuring her power was felt. In that moment, he realized that her insults were not just meant to belittle him. They were a performance, a display of authority, and perhaps even a way to protect herself from the unknown. The human's quiet reaction caused a small stir. Some nobles whispered among themselves, glancing at him with curiosity and surprise. In their eyes, he was different. Most visitors would have retorted, argued, or shown some reaction. He had not. He simply stood there, calm and patient, letting her words pass over him like water over stone. There was an unexpected strength in his silence, and it did not go unnoticed. He began to move slowly through the court, paying attention to everything he could. The floor beneath him was smooth, almost liquid in its shine, reflecting the colors of the crystals that hung from the ceiling. Sounds were soft, but rich. The hum of conversation, the whisper of robes against the floor, the delicate tinkle of alien instruments playing faint music somewhere in the background. He noticed patterns in their gestures, the way they bowed or nodded at certain points, the way their eyes shifted when speaking. Every detail was valuable. Despite the initial insult, he could not help but feel a sense of wonder. This world, with its light, its sounds, and its beings, was unlike any he had imagined. He began to sketch mental notes. The way the air smelled faintly of sweet minerals, the way colors seemed more vibrant, almost exaggerated. He noticed that even the smallest gestures here carried meaning, that a glance could express as much as a sentence. His respect for the alien culture grew with every passing moment. Meanwhile, the princess continued to watch him, puzzled. Her expectation had been simple: insult and receive anger, embarrassment or retreat. Instead, the human stood firm, silent and unshaken. This was unusual. She had rarely met anyone who did not react to her words, and it was unsettling. A spark of curiosity ignited in her. Why was he different? What made him strong enough to withstand her sharp words without responding? For the first time, she felt a twinge of uncertainty in her pride. The human finally approached the center of the court, bowing slightly in a gesture of respect he had observed from others. He did not speak, but his eyes conveyed acknowledgement. It was a simple act, yet it carried a weight that surprised even him. In a world where words were weapons, he realized that silence could be just as powerful. The princess's expression shifted slightly, no longer entirely mocking, but tinged with intrigue. She had expected a reaction, but he had chosen another path, one that spoke louder than any argument. By the time the human left the main hall, he had gathered more than information about customs and architecture. He had begun to understand the delicate balance of pride, power, and performance that governed the royal court. And he had also learned something about himself, that strength was not always shown through words or confrontation, but through patience, observation, and restraint. As he stepped out into the glowing streets again, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The princess's initial insult had been sharp, but it had not shaken him. Instead, it had given him insight, a lesson that he would carry through the rest of his journey. He did not yet know how their paths would cross again, but he had made a choice. He would meet arrogance with calm, insult with silence, and pride with understanding. In this world of dazzling colors and strange beings, he had found his first victory, not through confrontation, but through quiet courage. After his first encounter with the alien princess, the human felt both excitement and caution. The royal court was a complex place, full of rules he could not yet fully understand. Every movement, every gesture, and even every glance carried meaning. If he misstepped, he could offend someone important or worse, anger the princess again. But he was determined to learn, to observe, and to navigate this unfamiliar world with care and respect. The day began with a series of lessons, though not in the way he expected. The court was alive with activity. Servants moved gracefully, carrying trays of glowing fruits and liquids that shimmered with colors he had never seen. Nobles exchanged quiet words, their expressions telling stories that their voices did not. Every sound, every movement, every tiny detail seemed like a code he had to decipher. The human followed carefully, taking in as much as he could without drawing attention. Despite his focus, the princess found ways to remind him that he was an outsider. She made small remarks, half-whispered to those near her, sometimes loud enough for him to catch. She laughed softly at his clothes, at the way he held his hands, at the hesitation in his movements. It was clear she expected him to react, to defend himself, to show that human pride she had heard so much about, but he did not. Instead, he bowed when appropriate, smiled politely, and continued to observe quietly. Her curiosity grew as she watched him. Most visitors, especially humans, reacted quickly to her sharp words. They argued, they frowned, they tried to prove themselves. This human did none of those things. He moved through the court with a calm that was unusual, almost unnatural for someone in his position. He did not seem afraid, nor did he seem impressed. He simply watched and learned. During a formal gathering, the princess made another pointed remark, this time about his strange way of walking on the polished floor. Laughter rippled around the hall. The human felt the familiar sting of embarrassment, but he kept his composure. Instead of responding, he slowed his pace, taking extra care with each step. He showed that he could adapt without confrontation. Some of the courtiers began to whisper, noticing the way he handled the situation. They saw patience where they had expected anger, respect where they had expected pride. As the day continued, the human began to notice patterns in the princess's behavior. She seemed to thrive on attention, on the reactions of those around her. But there were moments, brief and almost invisible, when she seemed unsure, even vulnerable. He saw her glance at the ceiling as if seeking guidance, or touch her hair absent-mindedly when no one was watching. These moments told him more about her than her words ever could. She was proud, yes, but she was also young, still learning the responsibilities of her position, still testing the boundaries of those around her. The human's quiet demeanor started to affect others as well. A few of the younger nobles began observing him more closely, whispering among themselves about his calmness. It was unusual to see someone from another world handle the royal court without fear or anger. They began to admire his restraint, even if they did not fully understand it. The princess noticed this too, and a small spark of unease flickered in her eyes. Her words no longer had the same effect. The human's silence and careful behavior made her wonder, what kind of human was this? During the afternoon, the court moved to the gardens, a vast space filled with glowing plants, crystal, fountains, and pathways that seemed to float above the ground. The human walked among the gardens with careful curiosity, taking note of the strange flora and fauna. He touched the leaves gently, watching as tiny lights danced across their surfaces. Birds with transparent wings flew overhead, their chirps forming melodies that resonated through the gardens. He marveled at everything, jotting mental notes, fully aware that this world was far more intricate and beautiful than he had imagined. The princess followed at a distance, intrigued despite herself. She had expected him to be frightened, to run, or to challenge her. Instead, he moved with purpose and care, absorbing the world around him. She could not help but watch her mind turning over questions she had never asked before. Why did he not respond with anger? What gave him the confidence to navigate her world without faltering? Each step he took seemed to answer some silent question she had not known she was asking. As the sun, if it could be called that, began to dip in the glowing sky, the human found a quiet bench among the crystal trees. He sat, observing the princess as she wandered through the garden with her advisors. She seemed more relaxed here, away from the formalities of the court, but she still carried herself with the same careful pride. The human noticed the small details. The way she adjusted her robe when the wind shifted, the way her eyes softened when she looked at the light reflecting off the fountains. He realized that beneath her sharp words and confident exterior, she was still learning, still growing, still discovering who she was meant to be. At one point, the princess approached a fountain, dipping her hand into the water and letting it ripple across her fingers. The human watched silently from a distance, and for a moment he felt that they were connected, though no words were spoken. Her actions were deliberate, but unaware, and he understood them better than she realized. He began to see that the insults, the laughter, and the sharp words were not all she was. There was curiosity in her, a desire to understand, even if she did not admit it. As the day came to a close, the human made his way back toward the palace, careful to observe each step. He had learned much today, not just about the alien world and its people, but about the power of patience and observation. The princess had continued her attempts to provoke him, yet he had remained calm. In doing so, he had shown a quiet strength that no one else had expected. The princess, watching from the gardens, felt a strange mixture of frustration and intrigue. She had underestimated him, assumed he would react as others did, and yet he had chosen another path. She did not understand why he acted the way he did, but a small part of her admired it. The human had done something rare. He had walked through her court without fear, without anger, without disrespect, and in that he had made her curious, a curiosity that would grow in the days to come. That evening, as the human settled in a small guest chamber within the palace, he reflected on the day. He thought about the princess, about her pride, and about the ways people sometimes hide their insecurities behind words and gestures. He understood that she was young, still learning her role, and perhaps unready to face someone who would not be provoked. He also realized something important about himself, that he could remain calm, respectful, and observant even in situations meant to test him. That quiet strength would serve him well in the days ahead. By the time he closed his eyes to rest, he felt a sense of accomplishment. Today had been more than a test of manners or courage. It had been a lesson in patience, understanding, and the subtle power of silence. He had walked among the alien royalty and remained true to himself. The princess may not yet have respected him fully, but he had begun to earn something just as important, her curiosity. And in this world of shimmering light and strange beauty, he knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to show that strength is often quiet, and courage is sometimes best expressed without a single word. The next day dawned with the same surreal beauty as the first. The sky shimmered with soft purples and golds, casting a gentle glow over the crystalline city. The human rose early, determined to continue observing the alien world and its inhabitants. Today, he knew would be different. The princess's sharp words from the previous day had created ripples he could already sense. The court whispered about him quietly, sharing curiosity and astonishment at his calm behavior. He had made an impression without even trying, and he intended to continue learning. As he entered the palace hall again, he noticed the princess waiting near the center. Her posture was just as proud, but there was something new in her expression, a flicker of caution, a trace of uncertainty. She looked at him as if measuring him in ways beyond words. The human met her gaze politely, offering a slight nod, but still said nothing. His silence was deliberate. He had learned that sometimes words could escalate situations while calmness could shift them in ways unexpected. The princess made her move quickly. She stepped forward and spoke loudly, her voice carrying through the hall. The words were pointed, a direct insult meant to provoke a reaction. She wanted the human to respond angrily, to show that he was offended, to give her and the court the satisfaction of a reaction. But the human did not respond. He stood still, letting the words reach him but not affect him. His calmness was deliberate and visible, and it caught the attention of everyone in the hall. Some whispered in surprise, others frowned, unsure of how to react. The human slowly turned his attention to the other aspects of the court, observing carefully. He noticed the subtle gestures of the nobles, the way their eyes shifted when listening, the way their hands moved, as if signaling to one another. He observed the patterns of the guards, the way they positioned themselves to protect the princess, and the way the servants moved silently, almost invisibly through the hall. Every detail was important, every movement meaningful, and he absorbed it all. The princess, realizing that he would not react, felt a strange sensation, confusion mixed with irritation. She had not expected someone to ignore her in this way. She looked at him closely, searching his face for any hint of emotion, but there was none. He was calm, respectful, and patient. His restraint was not weakness, she realized, but something else, something she had not seen before. It intrigued her, even as it frustrated her pride. Later, during a formal discussion about court matters, the human took his seat quietly, listening to the conversations around him. Nobles debated policies, advisors gave reports, and the princess occasionally interjected with sharp remarks. She continued to glance at him, her eyes measuring, testing, but the human remained steady. He asked questions when appropriate, answered when necessary, but never allowed her insults to disturb his focus. His behavior was unusual and striking. People began to notice the difference between him and the usual visitors. The day continued with lessons in alien customs. The human learned about the significance of gestures, the meanings behind certain words, and the importance of timing in interactions. He practiced carefully, always observing the princess and the court, noting how she responded to others. He realized that she was testing not just him, but the environment itself, how newcomers could handle her authority and pride. By staying calm, he was not only learning, but also showing respect in the most powerful way possible. During a break, the human wandered into a courtyard filled with glowing plants and floating fountains. The princess followed, but at a distance, watching him as he moved among the flowers. He knelt to examine a plant, tracing the patterns on its leaves, noticing the tiny movements of the creatures that lived among them. He was careful not to touch anything that might be sacred or delicate, showing his awareness of the world around him. The princess's curiosity grew. She had expected him to be arrogant or defensive, but he was neither. He was quiet, observant, and thoughtful. She realized that his calm demeanor was not from ignorance, but from understanding. He was learning the ways of her world without trying to dominate it. She found herself intrigued by his approach. For the first time, she considered that this human might be different from others she had encountered. As they moved through the gardens, a small incident occurred. One of the glowing plants shifted unexpectedly, releasing tiny sparks of light into the air. The human stepped back carefully, showing caution and respect. The princess, watching his reaction, noticed that he was attentive and considerate, even in unexpected situations. She began to see that his calmness was not weakness, but a form of strength she had not anticipated. Later, back in the main hall, the princess made another attempt to provoke him. She spoke sharply, gesturing to his unusual clothing and mannerisms. Laughter followed, but the human did not respond. Instead, he maintained a respectful stance, observing her in the court quietly. His patience and calm began to shift the atmosphere. The laughter faded into whispers, and some nobles exchanged looks of admiration for his composure. He had managed to turn a moment meant for ridicule into a display of quiet dignity. By the end of the day, the human had learned much more than he had anticipated. He had not only understood the behaviors and customs of the court, but he had also seen the personality of the princess more clearly. Her pride was strong, but it was mixed with curiosity, insecurity, and a desire to understand the world around her. He realized that beneath her sharp words, she was still learning, still growing, and still seeking ways to connect with those outside her circle. The princess, on the other hand, felt a mixture of frustration and fascination. She had tried to insult him to provoke anger or embarrassment, and he had not reacted. Instead, he had observed, adapted, and remained calm. She realized that this human was not like the others. He had shown a quiet strength that she did not fully understand. His patience and restraint were not signs of fear, but signs of intelligence and awareness. She found herself thinking about him in ways she had not expected. That evening, as the human returned to his guest chamber, he reflected on the events of the day. He thought about the princess, about her pride, and about the ways people hide their insecurities behind sharp words and gestures. He realized that his calmness had not only protected him, but had also made others see him in a new light. By refusing to react with anger or offense, he had demonstrated a different kind of strength, one that relied on observation, patience, and understanding. He knew that the days ahead would bring new challenges, but he felt prepared. He had learned that sometimes the most powerful response was silence, and that understanding a person's behavior could be more important than answering every insult. As he lay down to rest, he thought about the princess, about her sharp words and her curiosity, and about the subtle bond that was beginning to form between them. Tomorrow, he knew, would be another test, a chance to see how far his patience and observation could take him. But he felt confident. He had discovered the power of quiet strength, and he knew that it would guide him through whatever the alien world had in store. For the first time, he understood that walking among a world so different from his own required not just courage, but wisdom, patience, and a willingness to observe before acting. And he was ready to continue that journey. The days that followed were filled with new experiences, each more challenging and fascinating than the last. The human had begun to find his place in the alien court, though it was clear that the princess had not yet accepted him fully. She continued to observe him, her pride and curiosity intertwining in ways he could sense even without words. Every glance she cast in his direction carried a subtle question, one that she did not yet know how to ask aloud. Who was this human, and why did he not respond as others did? One morning the princess summoned him to a quiet courtyard, a space far removed from the bustle of the main hall. The courtyard was filled with tall, glowing plants that swayed gently in a breeze he could barely feel. Crystal fountains sparkled in the morning light, and small creatures with translucent wings flitted from plant to plant. The human stepped carefully, mindful of the delicate environment. His calm presence was almost magnetic, and the princess found herself watching him closely, analyzing every movement. As he approached, the princess spoke, her voice softer than usual. Her words were not meant to insult this time, but to test him in a different way. She asked questions about his world, about humans, and about how he had managed to travel so far. The human answered politely, choosing his words carefully. He did not brag or exaggerate. He simply described his experiences and observations with honesty. She listened, intrigued despite herself, realizing that his perspective was unlike anything she had encountered before. They walked through the courtyard together, though a small distance always remained between them. The human noticed her subtle gestures, the way her eyes scanned his face, the way she adjusted her posture as if she were unsure how to behave. He understood that she was testing him just as he had been observing her. There was a quiet understanding building between them, though neither spoke of it directly. Each step, each glance, each measured word formed a bridge of silent communication. The princess began to see that her previous attempts to provoke him had failed, not because he was weak, but because he was thoughtful. She realized that he had learned the patterns of her behavior, the rhythm of the court, and the hidden meanings behind her sharp words. His restraint was not a lack of emotion, it was a conscious choice. This realization unsettled her, but it also sparked a growing respect. She began to watch him in a new light, noticing his careful observation, his patience, and the quiet strength in his composure. During a mid-morning ceremony, an unexpected incident occurred. A group of young nobles accidentally knocked over a small glowing sculpture, causing a soft clatter that echoed through the hall. Many would have reacted with frustration or alarm, but the human moved calmly, carefully, setting the sculpture upright and ensuring it was unharmed. The princess observed this silently, impressed by his careful attention and respect for her world. She realized that he was learning not just about customs, but about the importance of thoughtfulness, patience, and respect. As the day progressed, the human continued to move through the court and gardens, always observing, always learning. He noted the subtle interactions between the princess and her advisors, the way decisions were made, and the way responsibilities were shared. He began to understand that the princess's sharp words were often a way of maintaining authority, protecting herself, and testing those around her. He admired the complexity of her world, even as he recognized the weight of the responsibilities she carried at such a young age. By afternoon, the princess found herself walking alongside him without the usual tension. She asked more questions about his thoughts and ideas, showing a curiosity she had not expressed before. The human responded with honesty, acknowledging what he did not know while sharing what he had observed. She began to sense that he was not just a visitor, he was someone who could understand, someone who could see beyond appearances. For the first time, she considered that he might be a person worth knowing beyond the simple amusement of insult and reaction. The human's calm presence began to influence others in the court as well. Some of the younger nobles started to approach him quietly, seeking guidance or insight. They observed how he handled the princess's sharp words and the delicate customs of the court. They saw that patience, observation, and careful action could achieve more than rash words or anger. Slowly, the atmosphere of the court began to shift. Where laughter and ridicule had once dominated, there was now a subtle respect for his behavior. As evening approached, the princess invited him to walk through a quieter part of the gardens near a small stream of glowing water. They moved in, silence for a time, listening to the gentle sound of flowing water and the soft rustle of glowing leaves. Though words were few, the connection between them was growing. Each observed the other's actions, learning more with each step. The princess realized that she had underestimated him, and the human understood that beneath her pride, she was curious, intelligent, and eager to understand the world around her. A small moment of vulnerability occurred when a breeze shifted a branch, scattering tiny glowing petals around them. The princess instinctively reached out to catch a few, and the human noticed the softness in her gesture. It was a simple act, but it revealed more than words could. He realized that her pride and sharpness were only part of who she was. Beneath that exterior was a young person navigating responsibilities, learning about her world, and slowly discovering herself. By the time they returned to the palace, the princess's attitude toward him had changed subtly. She no longer sought to insult or provoke him. Instead, she observed him with curiosity, measuring his actions and considering his words. The human had not needed to speak loudly, argue, or retaliate to make an impression. His calmness, thoughtfulness, and respect had begun to create a quiet influence over the court and over the princess herself. That night, as the human prepared for rest, he reflected on the day. He had learned much about the princess, about the court, and about the power of observation. He realized that respect could be earned without confrontation, and that patience often revealed more than words ever could. He understood that the princess, despite her pride and sharp words, was capable of growth, curiosity, and understanding. The bond between them, though silent and subtle, was slowly strengthening. He also recognized something about himself. By choosing calm over reaction, by observing rather than responding immediately, he had gained insight and respect. He had learned to navigate a complex world not by force or argument, but by awareness, patience, and understanding. Tomorrow, he knew, would bring new challenges, and the princess's curiosity would continue to grow. But he felt ready. He had discovered the power of quiet strength, and he was determined to continue learning, observing, and building a bridge of understanding between two very different worlds. The next morning, the human awoke with a sense of calm purpose. The days he had spent observing and learning had given him insight, but he knew that today would be different. He sensed that the princess's attitude toward him had begun to shift. Her sharp words and haughty glances were softer now. Tinged with curiosity rather than mockery, he prepared himself to continue navigating the complexities of her world, mindful that every action could influence the bond forming between them. As he entered the palace hall, he noticed the princess already there, waiting with her usual grace, but her expression was more thoughtful than before. She studied him carefully, as if measuring his intentions and character. Unlike the first days, there was no mockery in her tone. Instead, she asked questions about his observations, his experiences, and even his thoughts on her world. The human responded politely, speaking with clarity and respect. His answers were honest, careful, and thoughtful, revealing both his understanding and his willingness to learn. The court watched silently. They had grown accustomed to his calm demeanor, his patience, and his respectful presence. His quiet strength had begun to influence the atmosphere of the palace. Nobles no longer whispered mockingly, but with curiosity and cautious admiration. The princess herself seemed unsettled at first, unsure how to handle the change, but gradually she began to respect the human in ways she had not expected. She realized that he was not only observing her, but also teaching her silently about patience, humility, and quiet courage. Later, in a private part of the palace, the princess approached him with a question about her people's customs. She wanted to know how someone from another world perceived their behaviors, their traditions, and even their rules of etiquette. The human explained carefully, choosing words that were honest and respectful. He described what he had noticed: the beauty in their customs, the thoughtfulness behind their rituals, and the care that governed their interactions. She listened intently, and for the first time she did not interrupt or challenge him. She absorbed his words, realizing that he offered not criticism but understanding. They walked together through the palace gardens, a place of glowing plants, crystal fountains, and softly flowing streams. The human moved with care, noticing every detail, while the princess watched his movements with a quiet fascination. She had begun to see that his calm, patient approach was not weakness, but a form of strength that complemented her own. In his silence and observation, he had shown her something she had never considered, that respect, patience, and understanding could create bonds stronger than any display of pride or authority. A small incident occurred in the gardens. A delicate creature, shimmering with translucent wings, fluttered too close to one of the fountains and nearly fell in. The human reached out carefully, saving it without harming the surroundings. The princess observed this silently, realizing that his actions reflected his character more than words ever could. It was a simple act, yet it spoke volumes about his thoughtfulness, respect for life, and ability to act calmly in unexpected situations. She began to understand that his strength lay not in confrontation, but in quiet, deliberate action. By midday, the princess and the human found themselves sitting quietly by a small stream. The water glowed softly, reflecting the colors of the surrounding plants. They said very little, but their presence spoke volumes. The princess observed his careful attention to the details around them, the way he studied the flowing water, the subtle movements of creatures nearby, and the way he noticed her expressions without intrusion. She began to feel a quiet admiration for his ability to see, understand, and respect her world without judgment. The human, in turn, noticed the princess in a new way. He saw that her pride and sharpness were only one part of her. Beneath it lay curiosity, intelligence, and a desire to understand others. He recognized that she had been tested by her own upbringing and responsibilities, and that her sharp words were often a shield. He admired her strength, her resilience, and her willingness to observe him as closely as he observed her. Though neither spoke openly of their growing respect, it was evident in every gesture, every glance, and every quiet moment they shared. As the afternoon progressed, the princess invited him to join a small group of young nobles in a cultural demonstration. He participated carefully, following their lead while maintaining his own sense of respect and awareness. The princess observed closely, noticing that he adapted without losing his own principles. He did not compete for attention, nor did he seek approval. He simply engaged with care, patience, and humility. She realized that this human had a wisdom beyond his years, and that his calm strength had influenced not only her, but also the court around them. By evening, a sense of quiet, understanding had formed between them. The princess no longer saw him as an outsider to mock, but as someone who could understand her world and her people. The human no longer felt the sting of her words, but saw them as an opportunity to learn more about her character, her culture, and the subtleties of her world. Mutual respect had begun to grow, silent but powerful, bridging the gap between their two worlds. As night fell, the palace glowed softly under the alien sky. The human returned to his guest chamber, reflecting on the day. He thought about the princess, about her sharp words and cautious curiosity, and about the subtle bond forming between them. He realized that respect, understanding, and patience had the power to change hearts even in a world as different from his own as this one. He had learned that true strength was not always loud or forceful. It could be quiet, observant, and deliberate. The princess, looking out from her balcony, thought about the human in ways she had not anticipated. She recognized his patience, his respect, and his ability to remain calm under pressure. She understood that he had walked through her world not as an intruder, but as a careful observer and a thoughtful participant. For the first time, she felt a quiet sense of respect for someone who had not only survived her sharp words, but had also taught her without trying the value of patience, understanding, and silent courage. By the time the human lay down to rest, both he and the princess had changed. The initial insult and tension had given way to mutual respect and understanding. Though unspoken, a quiet connection had formed, one built on observation, patience, and the courage to act thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. They had learned from each other, grown from their interactions, and discovered that differences could be bridges rather than barriers. The story concludes with the realization that true strength lies not in confrontation or pride, but in understanding, patience, and the courage to act with respect and care. The human had walked into an alien world, faced pride and mockery, and emerged not through argument or force, but through observation, restraint, and thoughtfulness. The princess in turn had discovered that there was more to her world and to herself than she had imagined. Their silent bond promised that future interactions would be guided not by insult but by respect, curiosity, and the quiet strength that comes from understanding one another.